Hey folks, Matt from rightoftheimage.com. Video editing software, photo editing software. There's a lot of choices out there, and sometimes it can be confusing. Sometimes it comes down to cost because, as is often the case, the best is often the most expensive. We have a viewer writing in asking about that and what to use. We've got YouTube username OBFips for fishing. What editing do you use? What editing software do you use? Now, he didn't specify whether we were talking about Photoshop or we're talking about video. Now, I believe this comment was on a video I'd done showing some animals that I'd been shooting at the Toronto Zoo using the 200 to 500 Nikon. So I'm going to assume we're talking about photo editing software here, but I'll answer both because it's a good question. So for me, I haven't used the Adobe suite. So I have the full CC Adobe suite. So that gives me Photoshop, it gives me Lightroom, and those are the two that I use. And I use them both. I tend to use Lightroom for most things, certainly for selecting and working as a catalog and doing a lot of edits now. Lightroom nowadays can pretty much do a lot of your edits. Where I still do use Photoshop is if I'm getting into, more trickier, touchier selections and maybe punching out a background and replacement or doing, modifying or heavily editing a photo. Then I pull it into Photoshop. But in general, Lightroom's pretty much my normal go-to. And then if I really want to start tweaking something, playing around with it, then I'll play with it more in Photoshop. Options to Photoshop, GIMP is probably one of the most popular options out there. It is a free option. It's open source. And it's good for a lot of people. Photoshop Elements is a good option. It's not as in basically what you're losing between Elements and Photoshop. People have asked me this, I know, in class when I'm teaching a Photoshop course. The big thing is you're losing a lot of the automation. So if you're a pro and you're shooting 2,000 or 3,000 photos or 4,000 or 5,000, some people shoot incredible amounts of photos at a wedding, even say 10,000, and you're going to be batch processing. In other words, taking a lot of photos and processing them as groups. So maybe that's, all the photos in the reception you've got under similar lighting and you've done an edit to a few, and then you're going to push that edit through and batch process all of the ones that are similar in that similar lighting and whatnot. That type of thing gets done better in the full Photoshop program. That's something that you lose a little bit of in Photoshop Elements. That's what I've found, it just the automation and the batch processing and things like that. A lot of this doesn't have quite the power behind it. So really, as more of a professional user is going to want to go full Photoshop. More of your hobbyist that doesn't do a lot of that type of thing would probably be happy with Photoshop Elements. Another option, Corel Paint Shop Pro, Corel, however you want to say that. Paint Shop Pro has been around for a while. A lot of people like that. It's a less expensive option, and it's quite good too. So I would recommend that too. You can have a look at any of them. As I said, GIMP is a free one. I use Photoshop because mostly, I guess the biggest reason is I've been used to it. I've been using it for years, especially when I shot weddings all the time. So I'm very familiar with it. I like to stay on top of it. I teach some Photoshop classes at local college, so it's good for me to stay up on top of what the latest and the newest editions of it are and what it does so that I can stay current for teaching. So there's a few reasons for me there beyond just liking it and being familiar with it. Also, Premiere Pro. Adobe Premiere Pro is my go-to video editing suite, and that's mostly because I like it, and it's an industry standard now. Most people are using it. It's very, very powerful, if not the most powerful, and I just really like it. So to get Premiere Pro, you're basically going to be getting the suite anyway, so Photoshop comes with it, and I have access to them, not paying extra really, because I'm already have to buy the suite to get my Premiere Pro. I guess you could probably get a standalone Premiere Pro, but the pricing is so close, I remember when I looked at it, that it didn't make any sense not to get the suite. Alternatives to Premiere Pro would be Sony Movie Studio. Now, that might be called Movie Studio. I think Sony might have sold that off, but there is that. It used to be Sony Vegas, and I think it might be just Vegas Studio. I'll put a link below. You can check those out. It's not bad software. I used it for a while. And then there was a lot of issues I found, and as did a lot of people online when you went into the forums and things, with support from Sony. It was impossible. I remember I had some issues of trying to reload it when I'd rebuilt a system, and I just couldn't get it reloaded. It wouldn't take my purchased serial number, and I couldn't get anybody on the phone to get that resolved. So I was irritated because I bought the software and couldn't use it. So that precipitated, I think, my switch to Premiere Pro at the time, although I'd already been dabbling in it. Cyberlink Power Director, it's a good option, less expensive, quite decent software. Not as powerful as Final Cut or Premiere Pro. I did mention Final Cut, I think, but Final Cut's a big one too. I think more for your Apple folks. What else do we have? I mentioned Vegas Movie Studio, and then there's Coral Video Studio, which is actually very good as well. It's very good software and a good price, especially if you don't need the latest and greatest iteration of it. You can usually get one version behind on sale, usually on Amazon. I'll put some links below again. You can check them out. Really good stuff. But in a nutshell there, I use Photoshop, and because I have the package, and I use Premiere Pro. And I really like both of them. I use Lightroom a lot too in the package, so that's another advantage to having the suite. But Premiere Pro is my go-to for video. Really, really like that software. Very powerful. It's a lot to learn. It's a steep learning curve if you don't know anything about it. Like anything else, you can just kind of brush the surface if you don't need the depths of it. But there's you can go deep with that too if you really want to learn on it. Far deeper than I have. I'm by no means a expert on Premiere Pro. I can use it quite well, fairly adept at it, but not an expert. Anyways, that's my answer for your question on what editing software to use. What do you guys use? I'm curious to hear from you guys. What are most people using? Are you using Photoshop? Are you using alternatives like PaintShop Pro or free ones like GIMP? What are you using for your video software? Are you using, Premiere Pro? And I think there's a Premiere Pro Elements, if I'm not mistaken. I'll put a link below to that too, which is, again, the same thing, kind of a dumbed-down version of Premiere Pro, which might be good for most video hobbyists. Or are you using something like Power Director, Vegas Movie Studio, Coral Video Studio? Let me know. Let me know in the comments below what you're using, why. Let's hear your user feedback, your experience with it. Let's help out our questioner here. And thanks for your question. Stay tuned. We'll be back soon here at artoftheimage.com.